Greener Media's Engineering News and Mining Weekly is interviewing Mike Pio, the head of energy at Nedbank Corporate and Investment Banking, CIB. Mike, it's great to chat to you while you're in the Nairobi situation in a forum about energy. What, in your view, is the potential for green hydrogen as an opportunity for the continent of Africa?
I think we are really in the cusp of a massive revolution in the energy space right now. Events in places like the Ukraine have proven that increasingly dependencies on single fuel sources are proving to be extremely challenging. And while we have some particular challenges in South Africa, a lot of the globe was faced with an energy crisis. When you start to hear about Europe facing energy bankruptcy issues, grid constraint issues, etc., it becomes a little bit worrying because we have tended to look at Europe in particular as a role model. So right now we are busy transitioning. We have a climate crisis alongside our energy crisis, and ultimately we need to find a way to decarbonize. So for South Africa in particular, the ability to transition through less carbon intensive fuel sources ultimately to green hydrogen, I think is incredibly important and possibly the only way that we can truly create an energy transition. So South Africa has, we've proven over the last 14 years that we can produce and procure big scale renewable energy projects. We've got north of 300 billion rands worth of investment in the renewable energy program, and we're producing that power at extremely competitive global PV and wind prices. We have massive amounts of land. The places where a lot of the wind projects would be built, where PV projects could be installed, are in places like the Karoo, the Northern Cape. So we have the land endowment. We also have an incredible resource in platinum group metals, which still form an essential part of electrolyzers. And lastly, we are positioned very comfortably at the tip of Africa, where we could potentially have export markets either to the east or to the west. So largely we have good infrastructure in the country. We have port infrastructure. There is a lot of work that will need to be done, but actually everything is set up for us to be able to go to the production at scale over the next 5 to 10 years. For the rest of the continent, there are a number of smaller opportunities. Places like Namibia, for example, are in the process of procuring big scale projects. They will be going to do extremely sizable projects, but countries like Zambia, Mozambique, all have the potential to actually convert, for example, current ammonia projects to green ammonia projects. That keeps them competitive in terms of global supply chains if they export food. So I think this really is the beginning of a massive ability for the continent to reposition itself. We acknowledge we have to keep utilizing our current fuel supplies. We can't just abandon oil, gas immediately, but green hydrogen is presenting us with a really, really good target point.
And what is being discussed at the forum in Kenya on aspects of green hydrogen development, such as project preparation and bankability and other aspects like that?
So right now, I think the challenges are clearly that the cost of producing green hydrogen, it does not present itself as an alternative fuel source tomorrow morning. It really, there are too many challenges in the supply chain right now around the transportation, the financing, as you've mentioned, etc. But we are seeing developments. We are seeing massive projects being developed in places like Saudi. The Saudi project was 100% banked off an offtake by Air Products to the United States of America. So one catalytic project sets the market alight, and we started to see people saying it can be done. There are projects being developed in South Africa right now where there are challenges with things like project preparation money, but the Japanese government, the German government, the British government all have strategies around their green hydrogen developments.
And although there are difficulties at the moment, how would you describe the readiness of financiers to become involved in green hydrogen opportunities?
There's a combination of two things. Number one, we are seeing virtually every important country the ability to become either an offtake green hydrogen, or ultimately a developer of green hydrogen or green ammonia projects, rewriting the policy frameworks. So we are seeing massive government commitment to policy frameworks which will take us down that avenue. That starts to get everything moving. But on top of that, because of the complexities and the stress around, for example, financing coal projects, I don't think there's a banking team in the world that is not sitting and looking at the evolution of green hydrogen as a future fuel source. So right now, I mean, every team is looking at how we position ourselves. There are a number of peripheral concepts as well, things like carbon trading and carbon credits, which again are going to indirectly subsidize production of things like green hydrogen. So the activity in Kenya at this conference, for example, there's a stream that has been unbelievably well attended. Every development financing institution, every multilateral institution, most of the South African banks, for example, many of Africa's banks are at the conference, and they're talking about, what next? How are we going to get there?
And you say governments are coming to the party. Is there any one government that is standing out as an example that others can follow?
So I would have to say at the moment, the Namibian government appears to be at the forefront of the development. They have already set up the equivalent of the South African IPP office, which was the office set up to procure renewable energy, specifically focused on the development of a green hydrogen strategy for Namibia. A number of concessions have been awarded. There is a massive delegation from the Norwegian and Scandinavian countries in country at the moment, talking about how to take the opportunity further. So the support is there. In my personal opinion, what the governments really should be focusing on, apart from having an overall policy framework, is on creating the enabling infrastructure, making sure that there are berths in the ports, that the rail, road, and pipeline infrastructure exists, and then letting the private sector get on and develop these projects. Most of the projects do not need, I mean, we will not have the ability, for example, as in the United States, under the Inflation Reduction Act, to, on a large scale, subsidize the production of, for example, green hydrogen. But the private sector is managing to find the offtake agreements. As I said, if we can get the cost points down to acceptable levels through things like affordable green energy, then the private sector just gets on and can develop these projects. So less interference is good, but there does certainly need to be a policy framework. So South Africa has a pretty good policy framework. It just needs more action around mobilizing the interconnectivity between institutions like Transnet, getting the rail, port, that type of infrastructure sorted out, and then letting the private sector go.
And what is your comment on the South African Hydrogen Fund, which was announced yesterday, the SAH2 Fund? It seems to be getting countries to back South Africa in this transition to particularly green hydrogen. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it. I have heard about it. I know that there are institutions like climate fund managers who are busy. They've been very actively involved in Namibia as well, that are putting together these funds. So I think it's part of this wave of interest and enthusiasm that is building around this particular sector. So we have a particular challenge in South Africa in that we do have to decarbonize some really old coal-fired power stations, and we've committed to a transition through the Just Energy Transition, and we have the Just Energy Transition Plan, but that's going to require huge amounts of additional capital to help assist, in the South African instance in particular, the shift from the heavy fossilized, the coal, etc. So I think all of these initiatives are excellent. A number of projects are being announced simultaneously, but there are institutions like the German government, as I've said, the Norwegians, the Scandinavians, that are actually putting their checkbooks down right now and are busy either funding bankable feasibilities or putting funds down to say, well, we will subsidize the offtake for a particular period of time of a product at the moment.
And if the private sector is going to become involved, what are the requirements for securing bankable off-taker contracts for green hydrogen developments?
So very similar, I mean, as we have done in financing any other big scale projects around the globe over the last, I guess, 20 years, project finance becomes a very good vehicle. But the project finance model does require proper bankable offtake agreements. That said, there are a number of massive trading houses that have been involved in, for example, the sale of ammonia, massive trading groups that will now be converting those ammonia suppliers into green ammonia suppliers at the outset. The ultimate end game, I guess, will be that green ammonia is then converted into, or split and converted into the green hydrogen itself. But the minute there is a party who is prepared to take off the product at a predetermined price in a predetermined volume, that becomes the anchor for a large volume of classical old-fashioned project financing, and we are seeing a lot of that happening. At the same time, we're also seeing a lot of blended financing where multilaterals or big development finance institutions work alongside commercial banks to produce a blended financing where, again, commercial banks require a particular hurdle rate to fund. The DFIs are either offering concessional money or at least providing some sort of risk mitigation at various stages in the project life cycle. For example, in terms of getting the project built, getting through the construction phase, and so on.
And I know that green is the color of Nedbank, but how deeply involved is Nedbank in the greening of the world? Are you involved with any green hydrogen opportunities, for instance? Have you got any companies that you're working with that could do something soon?
Yes, we are. Unfortunately, we are, again, as usual, normally under non-disclosure agreements with the particular clients, so we can't mention the names, but there are some major projects. So the advantage we have is that we have been financing green energy for the last 14, 15 years on the continent, and in particular in South Africa. We do have a leading position in terms of the number of projects that we have banked and the quantum of lending that we have put into that market. So the green energy component in a 450 meg type of project, at least 60% of the costs of that project are going to be the energy supply. So most of the South African banks have been, we've done that. We know how to structure the contracts and the financing. We understand the risks of the construction of green energy supplies, and we understand the operations. We've been funding that for a very, very long period of time now. So we are very well positioned in South Africa to be the leader on the continent, and certainly within the bank, our mandate has been that we need to understand every aspect of the technology so that we can be positioned. There are going to be hydrogen fuel cells involved in the mix. There's going to be green aviation fuel being produced. There are a number of consequences that, the journey that we are going to go down is not going to be one single project. It's going to be a number of pieces which ultimately are going to help to both decarbonize and transition us into this new fuel source. There are green hydrogen valleys being developed by some of the big players, some of the big mining houses. Massive institutions like Sasol have fairly well articulated their plans, and we really are seeing momentum. There are major Australian groups that are investing very highly or very heavily in the continent. Their stated intent is to help to position South Africa alongside places like Saudi, Chile, as a global green hydrogen player.
And finally, Mike, what in your view should be the main takeaway from this interview we're having now?
Thank you. So I just think it's the enthusiasm. We have to believe. We desperately need to do something about climate, and we have very few options left. So a massive commitment to growing out a greener economy, which will ultimately be transitioned into green hydrogen, it's going to become a reality. The scale at which we're seeing the developments and the movement is amazing. So I think we just need people to believe. I can still recall when people were cynical about mobile telephony and about LNG becoming, a fuel supply or fuel source of the future. Those transitions happened in 5, 10, 15 years. We're at the same place in the green hydrogen space right now. We're on the cusp, but I think it's accelerating far more rapidly than we think. So I really think it's just about people believing that it does become part of the future.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly, talking to Mike Pio, the head of infrastructure, telecoms, and energy at Nedbank Corporate and Investment Banking.